Hello and welcome to the Bottom Line podcast. I'm Jeremy, host today, joined by our Business of Football reporter and my best friend, Dave Powell. How are we, Dave?
Very well. We are best friends. We decided that
Yeah.
about 20 minutes ago.
Yeah, and it was a lovely moment for me
Was.
because I've been waiting for you to call me your best friend for a long time.
Yeah.
And here we are, podding together for the first time.
We are. We're breaking new ground.
Yeah.
This is seems. I wasn't ready for this today.
Yeah, we're taking bottom line.
Prepared for it. Yeah, I wasn't.
No.
wasn't prepared for this.
We're taking the bottom line to the top.
Yeah,
that's right. We call it the top line after this.
No, doesn't work. But
doesn't work. No. Well, anyway, we're live on YouTube, which is great. So if you are watching on YouTube, give us a big thumbs up. Press the bell. I always say press the bell to subscribe and get notifications. Leave us a question in the comments, and I can put it to Dave. Obviously, keep it all business. It's all business with Dave. So any questions about money, I've got some questions about money. Any questions about Liverpool's tour of the US, the business, FSG, Dave's your man. So get them in the comments. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or elsewhere, please give us some stars, like, subscribe, tell your friends, tell them to tell their friends and tell them to tell their friends. And we can spread the word, and especially about the bottom line. I host the Blood Red podcast every Monday and Friday. I don't get the pleasure of hosting the bottom line, but I do get the pleasure of listening to it, and there aren't many people more informed than Dave when it comes to the business of football,
and especially
and especially the business of Liverpool FC. So can't wait. So going to be a fascinating podcast. Before we carry on, I'd like to say a big thank you to our sponsors, NordVPN, who help make this all possible. Dave, you like to travel, don't you?
I do.
Boy, do you travel. Here comes Hull down the motorway. But when you do travel, having NordVPN on your phone is great because
get on board with Nord.
Get on board with Nord. You know the lingo.
That's it.
But yeah, Nord will protect you from, if you're using public Wi-Fi, it protects you from nasty people trying to steal your bank details or your passwords or anything like that, or hack your Instagram account.
Disappointed when they find mine.
Yeah, mine too. And it also means you can watch different things worldwide. I often use it when I'm holidaying in France with my wife to watch various different football matches. So, to get the best discounts off your NordVPN plan, go to nordvpn.com/bloodred. And our link gives you 4 months extra free on a 2-year plan. There's no risk at all with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the podcast episode description box. Dave, let's crack on. The Reds are out in the US on their US tour. It's their first one in 5 years?
5 years.
2019?
So obviously COVID impact. They lost a couple of summers worth of travelling where they probably would have fitted one in. And when they went first summer, which they travelled post-COVID, they went to Singapore because they had a lot of sponsorship activations that they needed to box tick with when they went out there, so Standard Chartered, etc. But back out to the US now, and I think that's where the focus is going to be for most, certainly this summer. I think all but Spurs from the top, the big six are out there. Bournemouth are out there. Villa, a few others. Don't say Wrexham. So it's in the lead up to the World Cup in 2026, everyone is pouring their efforts into kind of getting the American dollar and eyeballs on the product and the prize. And Liverpool's very much part of that. Obviously, they've got American ownership, strong American fan base. I've been there since 2019. So, but looking ahead to the World Cup, I mean, we've spoken previously in previous podcasts about how valuable the American market is at the moment. I mean, it's booming like never before. USA 94 was supposed to be seen as a tipping point for soccer, but it never really happened. It spawned the MLS a year or so later, but that didn't really catch fire like they thought it would. And it still remains that the Premier League is the most enticing global league for them to engage with, and that's the reason why all the big clubs are out there trying to get their products in the eyes of American fans. And you've got the cultural things such as Ted Lasso being popular, Welcome to Wrexham is popular. So there's lots and lots. There's a cultural shift.
Do all the sorry to interrupt. Do all the All or Nothing? It's All or Nothing. Is it the Amazon series? Do they all do well in the States?
Yeah, I think more so over here because the All or Nothing series covers all sorts, doesn't it? It's like the American football, basketball, but yeah, I mean, there's more interest, more content there than there has been before produced about football in the US. So it's all about tapping into that. Most clubs have half-as there.
Do you think this will tie into Liverpool's own documentary? They're filming at the moment.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, that was filming
back end of last season, wasn't it? I don't know whether it still is.
But I imagine be interesting to see the success of that because they got a Red Sox one which they were filming or they are filming. But yeah, content is king in these things now. But there's only Spurs that haven't gone out this summer because they've got a huge opportunity in Asia, obviously because of Son. So they're trying to monetize that as best they can, and obviously they probably feel they'll just be another voice in the US at the moment, whereby they can make an impact in Asia. But yeah, for Liverpool, it's about growth now and trying to nail down their standing in the US, and they're already a popular football club over there. But at a time when international media rights are almost well, they will do for the next cycle. They'll outstrip what we get domestically, and that's the most valuable thing to a football club. There's a reason why they're putting their flag in the ground.
Where the Liverpool position in the race for US popularity? Are they right up there? United, I guess.
Depends which club CEO you believe. I suppose Manchester City would argue they are. I don't think they are. Even though they've the same ownership group which owns an American team already in New York City FC. United, I think it's United. United, Liverpool.
Chelsea pretty big in the US.
On the West Coast, I think it's always. We'll probably talk about this later, but it's always interesting to see where these clubs place themselves during tours because it's usually in markets where they feel their product is best suited to be exploited and monetized, I suppose. So Chelsea go to the West Coast a lot. It's Hollywood. It's and Todd Bowley has business interest in Los Angeles. They obviously had a friendly with Wrexham this week. Wrexham's very much West Coast Hollywood.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So but whereas Liverpool tend to move towards Middle America, the East Coast. So I think all that's kind of instructive as to where people are at. But yeah, United had a history of touring early doors, much before many clubs were doing it, and they kind of made their global footprint quite large, and the US was a key market. And Liverpool have, they've been strong in that. But the key for Liverpool really is having American ownership, which is actively involved. I mean, the Glazers are kind of absentee owners for the last decade or so, at least. But FSG know how to run American sports teams. They know what the fandom's like, and they'll know how to greater monetize it. So in that respect, that they've been well positioned, and they've got a story to tell as well, Liverpool, which not all football clubs have, and it's a compelling one with history and everything that's gone with it, and that when you're trying to bring eyes and ears to support a football team is key. I mean, because football or soccer is a new thing for many. For some generationally, for some, it's the first thing they're coming onto in the US. Whereas, they're looking for a reason to support something which is enticing and compelling, and I think Liverpool does that better than most.
I've not been lucky enough to go out on one of these tours. Paul Gorse is there for the Echo at the moment, and please give him a follow because he'll be bringing you updates every day, both on YouTube and on our website. But when clubs go out on tours like this, do they set up all these pop-up sort of merchandise shops? Is it a big window for them to sell as much stuff as they can? And is this where the Nike deal for Liverpool comes into play a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I don't think it's so much about just making a quick buck off of merchandising. Although I went to the baseball in London Stadium last month, and that was the New York Mets and Philadelphia Phillies, a sellout over 2 days. But it's around the stadium was literally queues with 150, 200 deep to buy $200 baseball jerseys. and it blew my mind a little bit. So there's obviously a marketing element to it, whereby you can sell merchandise and earn lots of money. But in reality, I think the idea is you're trying to create legions of fans for years to come that will spend money, not just on a one-off basis buying a half and half scarf, but become invested in the fabric of the football club.
An ungodly amount of Man United, Liverpool half and half scarves are going to be sold in the next few weeks.
It should be banned. But yeah, it's that's largely what it is. They're all clamouring out there for market share because it's a relatively new market, and it's a fertile market because it's a country which has a huge population, but also has many has a significant portion of that population has disposable income. So that's compelling for clubs going out there. I think that some clubs have already engaged in pop-up shops. So I think Man City go out there this summer, and I think they've taken over space in the Rockefeller Center in New York. Obviously, they've got close ties with New York because of New York City FC. But Liverpool will do similar things. They'll either do fan events or they'll get involved in Premier League events that happen over there. So there'll be chances for them to kind of grow the brand. They'll take out legends to engage with fan groups out there, and it's all about trying to give kind of an immersive experience and make a connection with football fans that may never get to go and see a game. They may never go to Liverpool. And try and make a stronger personal connection as you possibly can without physically going to these games. So, I mean, pre-season friendlies are always a hard sell over here, but I think over there, it's kind of the one time of the year when they get to see their heroes in the flesh. So it's a valuable exercise for Liverpool. It's not something which they don't earn money from. It's commercially, it's very important. And they also Liverpool got quite a few American corporate partners. So it allows those partners to pay a little bit more money to Liverpool to have their branding out in front of their core market, I suppose, as well as being linked with Liverpool. So benefits are enormous, but the benefits are greater further on down the line than they are maybe in the here and now.
I want to ask you why they go in certain places on this tour, but before I do, when I was growing up, pre-season was about playing teams that you didn't really play often. So Real Betis, Liverpool start tomorrow night, don't they, against Real Betis, but then they play Man United and they play Arsenal, and on these to be fair, on the Far East tours and the US tours, they tend to play familiar opposition, Premier League opposition. Why is it that is a current trend of Premier League sides, especially the top six, seemingly playing each other now every summer?
It's the best chance of selling the product, really. Because it used to be, pre-season were full of playing either lower league teams or lesser teams from Europe, just as a sharpener. Really, you didn't even tend to play big European teams. It was it would be a second tier French side or something like that as just to warm up. But now, the eyes, if you've got a stadium, I mean these American stadiums, some of them are 125,000 capacity. If you're trying to sell tickets for that, you need to have two compelling elements. Really, you can't. It's going to be hard to sell tickets for Fulham and Leicester or something like that. But if you need, so the reason when the big clubs go out there, it's in their best interest for the both of them to maximise the potential to get eyes and ears on what the product is for a pre-season friendly game as well. I mean, they're always pretty farcical. I mean, the squads, the substitutes are in double figures, and it doesn't. Half the squad is, especially when you've had major tournaments, aren't going to be there. But the idea is to try, and the Premier League want that as well. They want there to be a showcase for their biggest and best on a global scale.
Did the Premier League help facilitate this?
There is an element of that. So the Far East one they did. I'm not too sure how involved they are in terms of the individual clubs' programs. But when there's a tournament out there, this isn't a tournament. this current one, is it? This
Don't
is
think so, no,
just a
no.
series of friendlies, and it's probably done independently with the clubs. But the Premier League will go out there themselves at this time, and they'll engage
Yeah.
in the same way that the clubs are trying to grow the brand. The Premier League want to grow the brand as well, so there'll be Premier League representatives out there in en masse, trying to do exactly the same as the football clubs are doing, because that's at a time when the Premier League were really nervous about La Liga being quite open and playing games, competitive games in America. I think the Premier League are trying to do as much as they can with pre-season out there to make it as exciting and compelling as possible without having to go down the route of that 39th game or whatever it is.
Yeah, okay. So Liverpool are playing in Pittsburgh, South Carolina, and Philadelphia. They're 3 games. They start in Pittsburgh, don't they, on tomorrow night, early hours of Saturday morning against Real Betis. When I looked at those destinations, you know, for me, who's not looking as closely at it as you are, I was quite surprised. You know, you expect teams to go and play. You said Chelsea, Hollywood, and in California. You expect teams to go and play New York, maybe, or Washington, these big cities. But I know these are also big places, but they're not the number one destinations you potentially expect teams to go. What is the explanation why Liverpool have chosen those places in particular?
There wouldn't have been I don't think they look at where they've been. So the last time they went out, it was Boston, South Bend,
yeah,
and New York.
yeah.
So they've ticked a lot of big boxes there.
South Bend, was that the big house? Is that what was the big house where they played Man
Yeah,
United?
was it South Bend? Is that South Bend, Indiana? I can't remember.
Can't remember.
But yeah, they've ticked a lot of existing boxes. So Boston, of course, they're a Boston-based firm.
Yeah.
FSG, they've got strong roots. New York is a key market. It's, you know, one of the closest of the American major cities to the UK. It actually has many similarities with Liverpool. Really, I mean, close to water, big industry, and you know, you look around the architecture of Liverpool. You know, down by the Liver Building and the Cunard Building. I mean, that's very, very in keeping with kind of New York. And I think it was this guy called Woody Johnson, who was the owner of the I forget which owner of the American team owner. It'll come to me in a minute, I'm sure it will. But he was involved in when FSG were looking at potentially selling Liverpool. He previously said that Liverpool was like the New York of Europe, which kind of makes sense. But they've ticked a lot of those boxes, whereas they've got a team in Pittsburgh Penguins, FSG, so they'll probably want to try and align those two things, makes sense. Then you've got South Carolina. It's a huge college stadium, which they'll pack out. But it's also looking at demographics, so Philadelphia as well. Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, I don't know much about Columbia and in South Carolina, to be fair, but it's got a big young demographic, so student population, because of the universities that exist there. So, you know, maybe they're appealing to that younger demographic in an area where there isn't so much competition for all the major sports. But Pittsburgh, very working class city, blue collar, has had industry which disappeared. I mean, it was a steel industry in Pittsburgh. And then you've got Philadelphia, similar type of thing, industry, blue collar. So all these things align with the working class and socialist nature of Liverpool, I suppose. So when you're trying to sell that compelling narrative that Liverpool have and the storyline, that makes it easier to sell. And these are big cities as well. So Pittsburgh, big city. Philadelphia's a big city. Makes it easier to sell to people, as opposed to if you're trying to, you know, maybe it's not what is compelling to people on the West Coast who very much invested in the glitz and glamour of it, or maybe you know they're looking towards. I mean, America is such a melting pot. Yes, it's one country, but in reality, you know, it's like a several different countries in its own. You know, so I think they're trying to lean into places which have some element of a simpatico relationship with Liverpool and its history, and it makes that easier to sell. But also demographics where there isn't great competition for in multiple sports. So yes, Pittsburgh have got the Penguins.
By the way, the Penguins as a team now, it's not very intimidating, is it? I don't know.
I don't know. I reckon some of them Penguins are pretty ruthless, you know.
Yeah,
You wouldn't go in the enclosure at Chester Zoo and just.
unless you're an Atlantic cod, I don't think they're the most.
Oh, I reckon emperor penguins if they can hurt you. But,
I could have an emperor penguin.
do you reckon?
Yeah, I think so.
Same size. But then they've got the Pittsburgh Steelers, who is a successful NFL side. But there's not much competition for football out there, and there's not too many major market teams. So I think they've probably looked at where there might be a gap for people to have more sport and fandom in their life, and that's probably what they never just decide these things by sticking a pin in the map. It's all done through, and also some of the partnerships they'll may have stronger connections to some of the areas they go in. So it's all thought out. But the Liverpool one makes a lot of sense. I did think they might go to New York because a few of the teams this year are West Coast focused.
Yeah.
So I thought Liverpool might go to New York, but Man City are going to New York, but maybe they feel because they've done Yankee Stadium. And it's finding a venue as well, which is also a challenge, because when you've got multiple teams going out to the same places, yes, there are a number of venues in New York. I mean, there's Citi Field, there's Yankee Stadium, but they want a large arena which they can sell 90,000 tickets at least for, and one which is available. I mean, because we're in the middle of the baseball season now, so would the Yankees schedule allow for that? I don't know. Similarly, Meadowlands is the closest NFL stadium to New York, but it's in New Jersey, so maybe they didn't feel it would align how they wanted it to. So I think it makes sense at the moment. They did New York fairly recently, as in the last 5 years. Next year, it's hard to imagine that everyone doesn't all go out to America again, because we're going to be 12 months off the World Cup.
Well, they did 2 years in the Far East, didn't they? So it probably makes sense for them to do 2 years building up to that World Cup.
Yeah, maybe they might have touch points with Canada. I don't know. Maybe Toronto might be. No one's really.
Did no one go for the Canadian market? Is that not? Off the top of my head, I can't think of teams going out to Canada.
And I think about it. I mean, the Canadian football's had a bit of a surge certainly in terms of recently. I mean, they beat the US men's team, but I think there's. I mean, Canada is it's a vast country, but I think it makes sense for some clubs to maybe target the likes of Toronto in the years to come. Maybe that's part of the offensive for next year, but. Because the World Cup is going to be North America. It's and there's going to be games in Mexico, and I think there's going to be games in Canada as well. I think, as well as obviously the major cities in the US. So I imagine next year we'll see everyone trying to get across the board and cover all bases, to use American parlance.
Liverpool played in Toronto in 2012.
There we go.
That's interesting. They do have a big Toronto fan club, so I wonder whether that is the future. We'll talk a little bit about the future and what this means for revenue in a moment, but obviously when at this time of year you get a lot of questions on transfers, and what kind of money is on offer right now, and what does that mean for the club in the present term?
They'll get a cut of ticketing, hospitality, merchandising, but there's also fees for playing out there. So I think the figures usually work between 8 million and 15 million for these tours, depending on the venues you play in, how long you're out there for, who you're playing, how many games you've got. So I think Liverpool's probably pushing the 15 million mark for this year. I mean, United... £15 million for one summer. Yeah.
That's so a lot of money, isn't it? Considering
clubs
Champions
don't
League.
usually account for it. It forms part of other elements of the account. So it could be through commercial revenue. They might account it, but United actually itemise it, or they did a couple of years ago, and it was around the 11-12 million mark there. And I think during COVID they attributed the lost costs of not being able to go to one of the places they were going as a 12 million hit. So I think it's really fair to assume that 15 million's around is a reasonable sum. But then you've also got things attached to it, so they would have been able to charge more money to some corporate partners, because they go into a market they exist in, they'll be able to have greater exposure. So there is a kind of a ripple effect with these things.
Yeah, interesting. And what about the future then? New revenue opportunities, fourth pillar of revenue generation, that sort of thing. What does this mean for Liverpool going forward and into 2025, the World Cup, that sort of thing?
So we've always traditionally had broadcast, commercial, and match day revenue as the three main kind of pillars of how football clubs earn revenue. But I mean, there's so much football fandom that exists now globally that clubs are trying to find out ways to monetize legions of fans, which are in the tens, even hundreds of millions, maybe in some cases. Aside from just them buying the odd shirt and watching games collectively in a bar somewhere, it's about how you reach these people and make compelling content and reasons for them to be engaged. So such things as the Nike deal, obviously, which we don't know for definite it's coming to an end, but it's likely that won't reach another cycle. But they engage with LeBron James to create a whole line of merchandise, which was designed to appeal to not just football fans, but to basketball fans, and just create a bit of a lifestyle brand, almost in the way that the Jordan brand did with PSG. So I've seen people walking around town in, PSG merchandise, which they might not realise it's essentially Paris Saint-Germain. But they would see it as kind of a lifestyle brand. That's a similar type of thing.
Levi's as well. They have a deal with Levi's.
Yeah.
Is that still exist, the Levi's deal? For Liverpool?
They got Converse, which is and they released a new brand out recently. So it allows them to sell Liverpool merchandise and get the brand out there through lifestyle brands. So you're not just appealing to football fans. So there's that element of it, which is what clubs are putting a lot of focus on now. Moving forward, they also want to continue to grow the media revenues from international markets, which involves them having to get greater exposure in those places, which is the reason why Premier League and the clubs are making a big play to make sure they're front and centre, so they remain the dominant global brand. I mean, Liga MX in the Mexican League is still the most watched league in the US because there's such a huge Mexican and Hispanic demographic. So, but the Premier League is next. MLS is below that, maybe even a couple of rungs below that. But so they're in a position of power, really, the Premier League, but they don't want to be overtaken by the likes of La Liga, whose strength is predicated on the strength of Real Madrid and Barcelona, and Real Madrid now look frighteningly good. And that, to some Premier League clubs, is worrisome because they'll become they threaten to become the dominant global football club. And when that happens, more people may be interested in switching over and following La Liga, especially if they commit to playing competitive games in America, which they have already said they would.
Okay.
Whereas the Premier League are averse to doing that, and I imagine with good reason. But also, I'm sure the clubs themselves, even though they may publicly say no, they would love the ability to have more flexibility and play a competitive game in the US because it has a chance to revenue generation, even though it's, you are effectively, tinkering and ruining a tradition which we've had in this country for 150 years.
Let's stick with that thought. But before we do, just some of our commenters. Hello to Paul, Carl, SDP and Liverpool Reds. Thanks very much for commenting. John Treverna, it says there are socialists in Seattle and some of us feel a little bit neglected by FSG. So speak to some of the people at the club that you know and tell them to get up to Seattle and go and see John and friends there.
Seattle is a really, really interesting market as well because it's got headquarters of it's Amazon headquarters in Seattle, Starbucks, and it's a market which lost some of its professional teams. So it lost the Seattle Sonics basketball team. Now they may get another expansion franchise in the future, but when you've taken away fandom in an element of a city, maybe there's a gap there to create something else. I mean, they've got the Seattle Sounders.
They were a very popular MLS team.
They are, and they are popular, and that should be kind of instructive to the likes of FSG that's a fertile market because it's, and also it's weather's very similar.
Yeah, so, well, there you go. Yeah, Jimmy Traore was out at the Seattle Sounders. I think I just remember a clip
You
going
love Jimmy
viral.
Traore, don't
Yeah, I
you?
like Jimmy Traore. He came on the podcast once. He scored a great goal there, and I think he was their assistant manager for a bit. So let's see Liverpool versus Seattle Sounders out there for John. Thanks very much for commenting, John. And if you've got any questions, anyone else, drop them in the chat before we go. Let's stick with the idea of competitive football out in the US. You've mentioned it. What does this tell us about the future of the game in the US? Obviously, we had Tom Werner come out on record recently and talk about how determined he was for them to play a game there, which was slightly strange for FSG because Tom Werner obviously is usually their spokesman. Liverpool's chairman is quite good behind the mic. Several of the guys here. Have you interviewed Tom Werner? Several of the guys here have done, and he talks
John
well.
Henry, not Tom Werner.
But it was slightly shocking to hear him say that because they must have known that would be quite an unpopular statement among
Especially when John
supporters.
Henry said it was something they didn't have any
Yeah.
interest in. I find it hard to believe that that's a conversation that they haven't had.
Yeah.
And it was just said on a whim. I think there's probably a realization that it might not play very well to be so forthright about it. I don't think Liverpool will be, nor should they be, the driving force behind why the Premier League takes games to America. But it will happen eventually. It's just the natural passage of time and the way things will be. There will be
the 39th game, isn't it? I mean, this
been going
conversation's
since
gone on for a long time.
2008, I think it was the first time they floated it, and now it's more relevant than ever. Because fans in the US, but in other countries are, well, why don't we? So the US sends its wares to be marketed in Europe via competitive games. So, but there is more of them, so it's easier to send two. Competitive baseball games when you have a schedule which is 162 games deep. Basketball's 80 odd games deep. NFL is a different one because there's only 16 games. That's if I think I'm not particularly au fait with that, but again, it's limited. But there's huge scope. Fans want to see competitive. They want to see the best of the best playing for high stakes.
Yeah.
And that's why pre-season tours have managed to kind of appease the fans in different areas for a time being, but I don't think it'll last forever. Certainly, someone will jump first, and once La Liga do, I think the Premier League will be scrambling to try and do something similar, even if it's one game of someone's game that they agree on. I mean, we already had was it the Birmingham and Wrexham made a representation to say could they play Birmingham and Wrexham in the US, which is rejected, but it's not going away. That kind of issue.
What have La Liga committed to?
Javier Tebas isn't backwards and going forwards. He's quite forthright, and they said that it was something they were open to doing, and they've been vocal about the fact they would. Real Madrid would love that to happen. Barcelona would love that to happen because they have, they've got complete dominance of that league anyway. So something like that, if you think about a game between Real and Barcelona, maybe an extra game, so a cup game or something like that. Although it's hard to predict who's going to be playing in such a cup game, but if you were to have a cup game in the US, I mean that would draw huge interest, and it'd be groundbreaking. No one's done it yet, so. But I don't know. I think the Premier League are very reluctant to be seen as driving this forward, but I think they will be pretty quick to kind of grab onto the coattails of whoever does it and then try and do it better than them very quickly.
You've put down on the agenda here a Champions League final. Seriously, do you think a Champions League final?
Yeah, definitely that'll happen.
Yeah.
There'll be a Champions League final in New York, Riyadh.
It's the European Champions League.
Yeah, definitely.
And you think it will happen?
It'll be the Champions League will be. I think the Champions League will give care the least.
Yeah.
About who it's upsetting because it'll be thinking, well, we'll go where if you want to compete in the Champions League, you want good money, then guess what? You can come, travel to New York. It takes less time to get to New York than it does to to some cities in Europe.
Yeah.
So they'd make that argument, but obviously it's not a European competition. But that's the way it'll go though, because we've already kicked open the door. I mean, with we've already seen it with the World Cup, haven't we? I mean, Qatar was never a destination that any World Cup should be in. It is infrastructure it couldn't cope. The whole country is left with like 20 massive stadiums, and kind of more stadiums than cities. So, but I think that it will happen. Whether it's 10 years, whether it's 15 years, it'll be played somewhere else. Whether it's Riyadh, New York, wherever. But I don't. And people I've spoken to about it, who work in the industry, think it's completely nailed on, and it might happen sooner than a 10 years, maybe even 4 or 5.
Is that not avoid the FIFA Club World Cup, can't Phil? I would have thought they'd be going all out for that.
Yeah, but it's a FIFA Club World Cup's an old concept which they're revamping, isn't it? Yeah. And they're still not sure how compelling that is, because when you play it like a pre-season tournament at a time when it's in the off season, when you've got other people, it's kind of the downtime. I don't know whether how compelling that will be, but I think people want to see the traditional huge competitions played. Certainly in America, the Americans want to see big competitions played on American soil. They don't want to see newly revamped, lesser competitions find their way there. But someone I spoke to said that the World Cup in 2026, there will be right now there'll be major conversations going on about who gets the immediate tournaments after the World Cup, when kind of fever pitch in the US is going to be right there. Yeah, it's going to be the most marketable soccer has ever been in the US, because there's already interest now, major interest. Going to have a World Cup when the whole nation will be, and they will be invested in it. And the US men's national team has got some good players. Maybe they might be impactful at a tournament. I don't know. That'll be important for it to catch on the US significantly, as if the US team do well. But I think that they'll probably realise that there's a golden opportunity for them, and they'll already be thinking about ways that they can either get a major tournament final on US soil in the aftermath of the World Cup, or they get the first competitive games involving European clubs in the aftermath. It won't be too long after that.
Okay, a couple of more things before we wrap this up. First of all, on that, would it not make sense for the FA, the Premier League, to organise the Community Shield in the US, or at the very most start with, say, the Carabao Cup final, which I still think would upset a lot of people.
Cup.
I love the Carabao Cup, I do, but it would upset a lot of people, including me. But I can for the Football League and the sponsors at the moment, Carabao, of that competition, it would give them a unique selling point. It would perhaps, for at least a season, boost the profile of that competition. And then the Community Shield is a game which, okay, it would take the word community out of it a little bit, but I'm sure if they threw all their charity elements into it, that is a semi-competitive game, isn't it? Let's face it, it's not a fully competitive game. No. It's a competitive game to the team who wins, so the team who loses it was a friendly and no one cares. But both of those games could fill a void there, no?
The Community Shield, I think the audience would be wise to the fact that, I mean, they want serious high stakes, serious high stakes. Carabao Cup final might work, but I think that type of thing happens when sponsorship rights start to dilute more and more. Yeah. But someone steps in, American firm maybe, and says, look here, right, we'll give you this enormous sponsorship deal for this competition, whereby you'll help all the lower league clubs, the Premier League clubs will get a greater cup, make it worth their while. Because at the moment it's not, I mean, for victory in the Carabao, I think for winning the Carabao Cup final, it's like $100,000. Yeah. Not withstanding the fact that you earn some of the chunk of the media rights, but that's just the prize money. What if someone says, okay, we'll sponsor this event, but guess what? You've got to play it in Los Angeles, the final, or you've got to play it in Chicago or New York or somewhere. But we'll pay you a huge sum.
The clubs would be well up for that, wouldn't they?
The clubs would be the ones who are. I mean, at the moment you've got this problem where the biggest clubs don't want the League Cup really. It serves a purpose as either a route into Europe for clubs that may have just missed out on the top 6 or 7, but it allows them to utilise their squads, their big squads, to a greater extent. But I think from a financial point of view, it's fairly worthless. Mm-hmm. So I think that if someone came in, that would be a way to turn heads of the biggest clubs, and they'd say, yes, absolutely, we'll get on board with that. Send us the details. We'll be there wherever it is. The MetLife Stadium will be there.
So what you're saying is, I've just thought of an idea that will not only revolutionise the League
I
Cup, but the
reckon-
future of football. So
I reckon
Football League
I
want to get
reckon
in touch.
Jeff Bezos has just seen this
Yeah.
and just thought, "Oh my God, Joe Rimmer, did you?" Do you know
Jeff,
what? I'm gonna.
Yeah.
I am. We're gonna do it. We're gonna pay.
Jeff, if you're watching the Amazon League Cup, we'll get it started soon.
Going to pay $1 billion for the rights for the Carabao Cup, and we're going to get it in the MetLife Stadium. But whoever did that would be bringing a competition which is struggling to be relevant.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the way that starts to happen, is cup games for competitions which are struggling for relevance, as opposed to taking league games there.
Yeah, okay. I've got a couple more questions for you before we wrap up. Andy Cap in our comments has asked, without selling players, what's the transfer budget roughly for the club? As a lot of the P&L is amortisation, and I cannot pronounce this word that he's asked, but the amortisation, there must be substantial cash generated that allows transfers. So basically, what's Liverpool's transfer sort of budget? I mean, they can afford big deals, can't they, if they want to?
So PSR threshold for losing money is 105 million over 3 years. Liverpool are well above that, even being in the red to try and even be worried about PSR. You're probably looking at double that. I mean, Liverpool have the wherewithal to engage in big deals, but it's what it looks like for payroll and things, which is important. So Liverpool's big thing is keeping payroll under control, and same with amortization costs. So amortization costs are your transfer fees divided over the length of a player's contract, and that's effectively your transfer debt. So you've got, off the top of my head, I forget what Liverpool stands at, a little over 100 million, I think. So that's transfer. I mean, they could have paid a big chunk of that money already to relevant, but on the books, that's what it looks like. So they're all about keeping costs managed. I mean, even though they do that, I mean, they still only made a loss of was it 9 million this year?
Yeah.
Something but small, but still for a club that runs itself like Liverpool, made a loss. So I don't think I think when there is the flexibility there for a big deal, but I don't think it'd be a big deal which involves wages which break the structure, because what that means is it's more that's when the problems start to happen, because you start to have to re-engage contract negotiations with everyone else, become more expensive, and all of a sudden that transfer outlay, which may not have seemed as much, starts to skyrocket because your payroll's gone up exponentially, and so is your amortization costs. So there is no. The long answer, yes, but I don't know the actual figure Liverpool could spend, but they could easily engage to a comfortable level in the transfer market this summer. But I always, unless they make the money up elsewhere, it's always hard to envisage them going much over 100 million per year in their transfer spend. I know they've done it maybe once or twice, but that's when that's been supported by player sales, because they run it like a business. And while that's deeply unpopular, that is what it is.
Liverpool, like your mate who never spends a great deal of money themselves, isn't going to be the first one to put their hand up to buy the round.
Ian Doyle.
But they've got loads of money in the bank.
Ian Doyle.
And they could buy a car outright or go
Ian
on a really
Doyle,
nice
yeah,
holiday.
it's definitely Ian Doyle.
Yeah, Ian Doyle, we've just described him. So Liverpool are Ian Doyle. Andy Cap also asked, what are the loans left on the club? There's stadium loans, isn't there? The money for the...
Yeah, it's been a while since I looked at those figures, but they paid a chunk down through the Dynasty investment that they had, because the idea around that was to improve cash flow by reducing interest payments on loans. So the figure off the top of my head, I've not seen it. I mean, I can't remember last time I looked at the balance sheet from 2022-23 was a few months ago, but and the Dynasty investment hadn't clicked in by then. So it would be a different picture than it was for 2022-23 now. So Liverpool's financial year ended end of May, and the Dynasty deal was September last year. So I imagine back end of this year we'll start to see the impact, but they've been lessened fairly considerably, I think, because that was the idea. That Dynasty investment was 150, maybe, all told. The actual equity they took in the football club was never revealed, but that was what it was for. It had a purpose of, they gave away a little bit of equity to improve cash flow. But what that looks like, we won't know until early part of next year, probably January, February.
Final question, Dave, and then I'll let you go. I know you've done a whole podcast on it recently, but just because there was been some talk of developments this week, Bordeaux, obviously FSG were in talks to buy Bordeaux, pulled out late last week.
Yeah.
Bordeaux have since accepted relegation to the third division of French football, but there has been some talk that the Bordeaux council will perhaps make the stadium a bit more accessible for an investor. That the stadium, am I right in saying the stadium was the thing that sort of
it was one of the major
deal.
issues.
Yeah.
So Bordeaux don't own their own stadium.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic stadium as well.
Yeah.
It's state of the art, 2015 built, 42,000.
Yeah.
But they don't own it, so it's owned by the local authority, and that's not rare in French football. The Parc des Princes is owned by the Paris Council, which is a major sticking point why Paris Saint-Germain want to move to a new stadium. There was an issue over rent charges and also the purchase price for any future purchase of the stadium, which couldn't be resolved in a timely fashion. But also, French football's pretty bleak at the moment, so their media deals. So, not to go too deep into it, but in early 2021, late 2020, early 2021, they signed a media deal with a firm called Media Pro, which was hugely lucrative at the time, and it was seen as being a way to close that gap between League One. I'm not going to say League and
beautiful French.
Was good, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe I should say more. And the Bundesliga and La Liga, I mean, it's still way off the Premier League, but within 6 months that deal had collapsed because Media Pro were missing payments, defaulting on payments, and they had to go back to market with Amazon and Canal Plus, got considerably less money, but the clubs had already spent a large chunk of this money, hence the reason why it's been a snowball effect. Bordeaux are in financial disaster, which they've largely been. It wasn't all the course of that. They were already in financial distress, but for clubs that were struggling already, it's kind of been a snowball effect, and it's been quite catastrophic. But the current media deal that French football's looking at is bad as well. So there's the economic outlook to try and recoup any money isn't great. Plus, it would take a lot of heavy lifting to turn around Bordeaux in a market where there isn't much money coming in, and a stadium they don't own, and they would have to pay a significant purchase price for. I don't think it was. And given the time, I think if it would have been a bit more time for the deal, so they basically had 2 weeks. They were given 2 weeks to sort this out. I think if there would have been more time afforded, I think it may have got done. I think they may have come to an agreement. But given the timescales, I think FSG exited it to try and give someone else a chance of coming and salvaging from the wreckage. But there was never really any chance of that, and they've kind of accepted relegation to the third tier. So, yeah, it's sorry state for Bordeaux and the fans, but I mean it does allow them to kind of reset and rebuild, I suppose. But for FSG, I think they'll move on to.
So do you think that deal could be resurrected, or Stephanie?
I don't know whether they.
That's also French, by the way.
What?
Stephanie. It's finished.
Stephanie.
It's finished.
You're good at this, aren't you?
Yeah.
Hey, multilingual. I don't know, but I think the third tier of French football is not where they want to be. A bit further down than they would expect to, and the stadium issues still remain. I think they'll probably look for someone. Maybe second tier France, Germany, Belgium, maybe even Japan. Top tier, that might work. Portugal potentially, but I think they'll just be back to the drawing board. But I don't think they'll take their eyes off it entirely, because they're always opportunistic with what they do anyway. And I don't think this will be any different. I think it was a quick turnaround from engagement to talks to eventually ending it. It was all happened within the space of 10 days. I imagine that kind of thing will happen again. Where there's opportunity, distressed assets, they'll jump and try and get a deal done on the cheap. Okay, Dave. Merci, mon ami. Thank you for listening. Thank you for stopping by on the Bottom Line podcast. It was a pleasure to host it for the first time. I'm enlightened when it comes to business deals for Liverpool, and we'll be keeping a close eye on this US tour. When will you be back? Not this next week, the week after? Yes. Yeah, you're not. Yeah, week after. Yeah. Well, we will see you then, and we'll be back with Blood Red this week, and we'll have Paul Gorst send us podcasts and reports from the US, so look out for them. Like, subscribe, give us some stars,
press the bell. You know what to do. Support the Blood Red channel. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you again soon. Ta-ra.